All right, welcome back to my channel. My name is Yennefer, and I am the founder of YourWellnessIsWealth.com, YinYangYoga.com, Myamathics.com, and BeautyBodyAndBrains.com, as well as SacredlySexy.com. So today I want to talk about a case of identity crisis. So, you guys, if you've been my friend for a while, you've seen me on and off the internet for at least a decade now. And I want to come in and talk about the recent, just I guess it's a download that I've received, and I need to tell you guys about it. Um, and every time I come on, that's always a part of my message is like I'm the lesson, and my lesson is usually my message. Um, so what I want to talk about is how knowing who you are is like a foundational piece to wholeness, to wellness, and which I think are the keys to wealth. All right, abundance, wealth. Knowing who you are is a foundational piece of that. And you have to embrace every aspect of who you are. Okay. So recently I was on YouTube and I came across this channel that was sharing to a specific audience, basically like light-skinned women, right? And I thought it was peculiar and new, but as I listened to the woman's message, it started to make a little bit more sense to me. There's so much division and separation in our world, and sometimes we don't take the time to actually think about how these things affect us. We know colorism as well as racism are huge issues within our world. One of which we don't really talk about a lot is colorism, especially among certain populations. For example, if you're on the lighter skin of end of the spectrum, you might not choose to involve yourself in the conversations about colorism. So, anyways, this young lady's channel, she was taking the time to go into some of her healing stories and share her healing journey as it was a part of the light skin sort of community and the issues that face that community. And I thought it was very courageous and brave of her because a lot of times people get spoken out against when they choose to speak on certain things because it's as if um, some folks have like a monopoly on whether or not you could be hurt by a certain thing or have a healing story about a certain topic when that's not the case. So the point that I'm making here is it doesn't matter if you're light skin, dark skin, or what color, what part of the spectrum you fall on. We each have a unique story about not only what makes us who we are, but we all have stories in our, in our life and throughout our journey that have contributed to our wholeness. And so what I'm trying to say with bringing up this story is it's necessary for us to embrace every single aspect of who we are, every single aspect of who we are. It has to be embraced. And so I want to tell you guys a story about ancestry and genealogy. And I feel like this affects so many people of color, especially if you are, you would fall in the category of African American. So many of us don't really know, we claim we are African American, But when we just think about that term, African American, and we compare that term to like being Korean American or um, Asian American or all the other ones, the definition changes. It's only when it comes to African American that we have to assume that 5 or 6 plus generations back, we have an ancestor from Africa. And so thus we're called African Americans. When it applies and we think about Korean Americans, Asian Americans, what have you, it's just a one generation down situation. And after that, you know, it changes. So it's a question of who are we really? Who are we really? And that is a question that I think is necessary for us to take some time into answering and for us to take some time into investigating is knowing exactly who you are and taking into account the entire story, not just a piece of the story. I think a large part of what ails Black people as a community foundationally has to do with our sense of identity and the fact that it is there's a identity crisis going on, and there's also some mistaken identities. And we all have to look individually into our ancestry in order to be able to answer some questions about who we are. If we look at collectively where we are lacking values, we're lacking a sense of culture, we're lacking morals in some areas, and we're lacking in large part, a connection to true divinity. There's a lot of folks out here with connections to what I'm going to call false divinity. We sit around and we wonder why prayers aren't being answered. We sit around and give excuse after excuse after excuse about, oh, it must just be God's will that this happened and that happened. And repeatedly, you continue to get stolen from and ran circles around, frankly, over and over. Being ran circles around over and over. So foundationally, if we address the identity crisis, that will be able to answer a whole lot more questions, because right now we are wearing masks or we're just walking blindly. And there is no connection to our true ancestry, our true spirituality, and true divinity. All right, so all of this came about, for a while. Like I've always wanted to know my ancestry. So over 10 years ago, I sent my DNA into ancestry.com, and I already heard that, yeah, they steal the information and you have to be, aware of that because they can use your information in ways that you may not agree with. Well, it's too late for me because I did all of this before I knew. So anyways, Ancestry has my DNA, and they've given me a little synopsis on what they think my DNA is made up of. And so I want to address something that is, I think it really pisses me off that this became such a prevalent message on the internet. it really pissed me off. So a few years ago, there were these posts going around on Instagram claiming that people, Black people saying that they had a Native American grandmother was a straight up lie and that it wasn't true. That is a lie from the pits of hell, and I send it right back. You should always take your ancestors' word over anything else. What your mother told you about who your people were, what your grandmothers told you about who your people were, and who your grandfathers told you your people were. You need to take that as truth. So growing up, that was one of the stories that I heard. And so I started to do some research years and years, never got anything. So what I want to show you is just this line here. These are all of my great grandparents. And as you can see, by the time you get to great grandparents, we have eight great grandparents. And as you can see, I've only been able to really, maybe four of these lines, I've able to figure out who my great great grandparents are, right? But one line in particular, one great grandmother here, is actually, so my grandfather here, he always told my mom and her siblings that they were Indian, right? And we, they never really quite knew what tribe it was. So I think they may have said Cherokee. I don't know. But I started doing the research. So it turns out that his mother was, as a baby, sent back from Oklahoma to Tennessee, and she was adopted in Tennessee. And so I had the opportunity on this past weekend to visit an original Black town in Oklahoma. And that town is called Tallahassee, Oklahoma. It's one of many original Black towns. And so when I went there, I had a chance to speak to just one of the historians in the area. And so she was telling all sorts of stories about how the original Black towns came to be, like how they were even created in the first place. And so this is what happened in a nutshell. And this also gave me a little bit of information about why, as a child, my great grandmother was sent back to Tennessee as babies. Because who gives up their baby and sends their baby, states away? Who does that? And why would you do that? So, here's what happened in a nutshell. Oops, I'm sorry. Y'all can't even see my screen. My bad. All right. So let me go back here. So here, all right. So as you can see, by the time you get to great grandparents, you have eight great grandparents. That's already such a wide variation of possibilities as far as ethnicities of where you're coming from. And it's really hard sometimes to go past great grandparents when you are a so-called African American, just because you get into the late 1800s, there was a fire around, I believe it was the 1870 census records were damaged in a fire. And then prior to that, slavery was abolished in 1865. So prior to 1865, the records are different. Okay, they may not have been recorded in the census by name and things like that. So it gets really choppy when you try to go. For me at my age, when I'm going past great grandparents. However, there are a few lines that I'm able to get great grandparent information. So what I'm speaking of right now is one of my great grandmothers as a baby was adopted in Tennessee from Oklahoma. And so what we have found out is that her mother was a Native American of one of the civilized tribes. And I've been trying to figure out why, as a babe, why would you send your 6-week-old back? And so I always wondered that. And so this past weekend, I was in Oklahoma, Tallahassee to be specific. I also visited one of the other original Black towns called Rentisville, Oklahoma. And I will tell you guys about that another day. But as far as Tallahassee is concerned, so one of the town historians was there and she was telling me the story of the Native Americans and the origination of the Black town. So in a nutshell, what she said was that the Native Americans were forced west into Oklahoma, right? That was when they created that was a part of the Indian Removal Act and all of that, right? So they were forced west into Oklahoma. Supposedly, now this information is coming from another source. They brought, well, you know what? I'm not going to go into that. I'm just focused on what the historian from Tallahassee told me. So Native Americans, they own the land out here in Oklahoma. And what happened is there was a lot of mixing, okay? Which is a little bit controversy because the more research I do about Native Americans and actually what they look like is you probably in some cases couldn't tell the difference between some of the Native Americans and the Blacks in some cases, and because the skin tones varied amongst the tribes, the skin tones varied. So we think that Native Americans look like, you know, what do we call that look? I don't know what to call it without butchering it and making it like, but you know, the look that we think Native Americans have. Well, Native Americans were in all sorts of skin tones and things. So that's one story, one lie, I guess, or one way that history has been steered. So anyways, there was mixing. But then when they started to require the Native Americans to get on the scrolls, they had to start putting everybody into categories. And so they continue to move the Native Americans. And in order for them to be considered, and to be a part, according to the government, their tribe, they had to agree to certain things. And this is when they created the Dawes rolls and all that stuff. And what happened is the ones that got on the rolls and the ones that were considered Native American by the government, they left and they gave these areas and these territories to the mixing that was happening. So like the descendants, the people that were mixing with what they considered to be the enslaved or former enslaved, they were all mixing together. And so they started to have babies, a lot of babies. And so that's when those that were considered, according to the government, Native American, they started to separate. They had to separate. And so that's how we ended up with all of these original Black towns in Oklahoma, because they were basically the descendants, or they were like mixed up. They were like half Native American. I don't want to just say half because who knows, but they were mixed. They were just all mixed up, and they had some Native American blood. So, if you haven't already done some research on like the Dawes rolls and all of that stuff, it's a very interesting history. And I'll try to include some links, but y'all, I'm not a historian, and I'm doing my best just to get a message across using what I've learned about, you know, ancestry and lineage. So, anyways, back to what the historian was telling me. So they started to have a bunch of babies, and it was causing problems with the government, right? Because the area was becoming populated. So those that got on the rolls left and went to a different place, and they gave over the land to those that stayed, and these became the original Black towns of Oklahoma, right? So also during this time, since they were having the babies, all of this was happening. So what I am thinking happened is that with my great grandmother, she was a part of that mix up. She was mixed up somehow, and she had to be sent away because of all of the treaties, the Indian Removal Act, all of that was happening because they were separating and putting everybody into category. And so what they wanted to do is basically the darker skinned people, the ones that were darker skinned, whether they were Native American or not, were considered Black. So this is how we started to get the creation of white, Black versus all of these other things that used to exist over the years. White and Black, those are new constructs that have been created. That was not something that always was the case, okay? Because there's always been different shades of skin tones within Africans, within Native Americans as well. And this is coming from a Native American mouth, okay? And so, anyways, the point that I'm trying to make is that we have a separation and a disconnection from our true identity. And so everything that makes up a culture, right? If we look up the definition of culture, we know, I remember culture means a way of life from like middle school, but things that make up a culture have to do with like our religion. That's a big part of culture, our beliefs, our morals, our customs, our behavior, everything that we do, everything that we are makes up and describes our culture. So if we never had one, or we're not connected to the culture of our DNA, there's a disconnect. And we have had all of these imposing, basically like a false culture imposed upon us. Everything that involves culture, including religion. This is the source of the disconnect. It is not normal, it is not natural, and it is not God's will for us to be suffering. I'm sorry. I don't care who said it. It is not God's will for us to be suffering, poor, deaf, dumb, and blind for generations. Is simply not. So if you find yourself in any of those categories, I suggest that you begin to go and reconnect with who you truly are in your blood. And you can begin doing that with prayer. And that's my message today. So when it comes to poverty, no, does not have to be the case. When it comes to all of the death, the sickness, and disease, no, it does not have to be the case. So there's a couple movies that came to mind as I was speaking, and TV shows that will show you kind of how the culture got lost and also what the colonizer does to separate people from their culture. So I was watching this show, I believe it's called, I think it's called 1884. I think this is it. No, 1883. This series right here on Paramount. It follows several different character stories, but one particular character that it follows is this Native American girl. Let me see if I can get a picture. No, it's not 1883. It must be. Oh, so 1883 is a part of this like multi-series, and the other one is called 1923. Okay, yeah. So the other one is called 1923, I believe. Is it? Let me see. 1883 series TV shows. Because they made like two of them and they're like sequels. Okay, yeah, 1923. So they made 1883 and they made 1923, but it follows like the same plot of land and the same sort of family over the generations. Let me see if I can pull up an image of this Native American girl, this story that I want you to pay attention to. Yeah, this is it. So it's actually in 1923. So this is this girl. This is what she looks like. I'm going to tell you a little bit without telling you the whole story. So basically what happened is the colonizers steal the kids. Like when they showed up and they started trying to make deals with some of the Native Americans, they stole the children, or they would make the Native Americans either sell their children or force their children into the colonizer's school. They were banned from singing their own songs, from speaking their own language, and they were even prevented from leaving the school and going back home to their tribe. This young lady, this Native American character right here, if you watch, it's a good depiction of what happens. The things that they would do in the schools and how she tried to get away. So I think that that's a great depiction of what happens. So if they steal your children, first of all, they show up to you, they pull the okey doke on you, right? They show up, they come around fast talking you, trying to make a deal with you. They pull the okey doke. take your land. Then they try to make your kids go to their school. They don't let your kids learn nothing about their heritage, but they make your kids learn their heritage, their language. So they cut them off from their culture. And so these so-called, okay, I don't want to offend anybody. So I'm just going to put that out here. I'm not trying to offend anyone. So if this is not you, don't let it apply to you. If the shoe don't fit, I'm not talking to you. But I'm talking about those that for which this is the case. And this is the case. When they civilized the tribes, there's only 5 civilized tribes, first of all. So we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands of tribes across the Americas. There's only 5 fucking civilized tribes. Excuse my language. Sorry, not sorry. Civilized tribes. You know what civilized means? They came in, if they didn't rape the women, they swindled them and married the women and had babies with them. So they began to mix with them. They stole your kids and they cut your kids off from their actual heritage and culture and gave them another one, a false one, which was theirs. And then they began to create these territories where only those people lived. And then those people began to procreate with one another. The folks that got left behind, they got cut off from their tribe, they got cut off from the elders. So there was no way to continue to pass down, um, you know, the sacredness of the tribe and the culture. So this is just like, I'm using Native American in this example, but really this can be applied even to African tribes for the ancestors of ours that did come across on those boats. The same thing happened to them. If you watch the movie Australia, that's another movie. It tells you what the colonizer did in Australia to those Aboriginals. They literally came in, they slept with the women, and they call it like whitening, brightening the race. That's what they do. So the point that I'm trying to get at is stop wearing the false culture. Take some time to go and reflect, go within. You don't need to start on the internet. You don't even need to start with genealogy and ancestry research. Start with prayer and reflection, inside, and wait for answers. Ask and let spirit speak to you and show you. Because that's that's true divinity. That's true divinity, not what we see on TV, not what we've watched on TV for centuries at this point, not even what another person tells us. Okay? That's not your ultimate primary source. You need to seek God within. That is the primary source. And then we have to be obedient with how we're being led. You have to discern the voices that you hear inside. Because if we don't understand how our brain and how our minds work, because our minds can pick up voices, can pick up messages from the programming. This is why TVs exist in the first place. The same thing with radio, it's radio programming. Songs program Okay, there's only certain programming allowed. Just the same way with the Bible in some cases. God, Him itself did not sit down and choose which books was going to be in the Bible. The colonizers did that. They sat and chose. They went and translated. They went and translated, and they went and decided what was going to be in this book that they printed. They printed the book. And don't tell me no white man is moving on behalf in your best interest, because he is not. The white man is moving in his own best interest, its own. And I'm sorry, when I say the white man, I don't mean every white man, but I just mean the colonizer, okay? Because there are some good white men out there, okay? Prayerfully, affirmatively. So please don't take any of that, you know, please understand where I'm coming from with this message. I'm talking about the spirit of the colonizer and the spirit of imperialism that seems to be dominant within a certain race more so than others. Okay. So again, the poverty, the sickness, the death, disease, this is not God's will. It is not. So if this is what's going on in your life, you need to work to eliminate it. And you need to put your culture, the culture of your blood, back into yourself. And it starts with, and it's a part of with what you eat, because food is a part of culture as well. Food is a part of culture. The foods of is not on this picture, but food is a part of culture. Here it is right there. If you watch the movie Killers of the Flower Moon, you will see how a lot of the Native American women got sick with diabetes because they started eating food that was not a part of their culture with too much sugar in it, and they died of diabetes. They lost their land to the white men that swindled them and married them. And guess what? All that generational wealth transferred over to a completely different lineage. So that's what has happened. So you have to embrace who you are. And sometimes, hey, you need to understand why you look the way you look. And you need to embrace it. Why are you the way that you are? Why did God allow you to be made in your uniqueness the way that you're made? Who are you? Okay, so that's my message today. Um, all the best. All the best. Until next time.